solutions arise in a curious way. Cruel but
Quiet on the set. The challenge on this fly is finding pheasant rooster tails that have barbs long enough that you can do the kind of wrapping that you need. If you look at your piece of pheasant tail, if you have one that has both sides of the center on it, one side will usually be decidedly shorter. So don't use the shorter side. You want to get the longest side that you can, okay? And that to me has been the challenge. An awful lot of, I don't know where we're getting the pheasant tails that have really, really long side barbs, but if you see any, and you want to keep some, I would recommend that you keep the ones that have the longest barbs possible, because they have the most use. This is a neat little fly. The reason I recommended starting with or at least finishing with a size 14 hook, is when you start wrapping this pheasant tail, it's going to get shorter and shorter, and if you only have about that much that you can grab, it has a tendency to slip out of your fingers and unwind, and you get to start all over again.
Gotcha.
You might find hackle pliers will work. The other thing I think you're going to see is when you start wrapping the strands of pheasant tail, they'll want to separate on the hook. And if that happens to you, just gently start at the bottom and kind of put a little twist or two in them so that the strands stay together a little bit better, and see if that will help. Otherwise, it just seems to get, the strands get further and further apart, and you don't get the depth that you need with all those strands together. So let's give it a whirl.
All right. First thing we're going to have to do is lay a thread base. And I've got to try and I'm going to start up by the eye, and I'm going to just go right back to about where the bend starts with my thread base. I would say Andy, and I don't know if we had any other from this class at Bentonville High School last week other than Andy. We had a couple of repeaters, I think, were there, but we had a good time. Some of us got tires that knew their left from their right. Some of us didn't. Some of them had coordination. Some of them didn't. But that's kind of par for the course.
Okay, I'm going to take my pheasant slip here, and I'm going to try, sometimes it helps if you try to separate down by the center 4 or 5 of these strands. And if you use your dauber or whatever to get 4 or 5 strands, see, I've got a size 14 on, so I think I'm going to try and keep it to about 4 strands. If I can separate these. If not, they'll have more strands. Okay. There's 4. I'm just going to pull them off the shaft and make sure the tails are pretty much even. I've got them pretty even.
I've got them pretty even. The length of that tail is maybe slightly longer than the gap of the hook. You don't want a real long tail. So I'm going to try and make that, that should be a little bit longer than the gap of the hook. And I'm going to get that on right above where the barb is. Okay? Now, the next thing you have to tie in is your copper. And what I like to do, it gives it a little bit more weight, is I put the copper up toward, maybe 3/4 or so up the shaft of the hook. I'm going to tie it in where I tied it before. Then you've got to lift those barbs out of the way when you tie the rest of it in, because you don't want to tie over those barbs yet. So I'm just putting that copper wire in, and I'm going to maybe move those barbs back a little bit because I want to start right about where the bend is. And then I'm going to bring my thread up about 2/3, 3/4 of the way. I'm going to half hitch it right there and get it out of my way. And here's where the fun starts. So I've got these 4 strands. I'm going to wet my fingers, and I'm going to try and give that a little bit of a twist before I even start. And then I'm going to start wrapping. I've got to be sure I get my thread covered. I'm going to wrap that forward. Now I'm in trouble. This is another problem you have with pheasant. It has a tendency to get old and brittle. And I just had one of my 4 strands break. So I'm going to be challenged to get a pretty good body on this one already. Now I'm going to wrap that forward about where I tied off, about 2/3 of the way up, and I'm going to have to try to tie that off. I want to get another wrap if I can. And I'm going to tie that off right there, and I'm going to trim that. Okay? Now, at this point is when we start wrapping the copper wire, and here's a little clue. This is an exception to when you want to wrap away from yourself. As you can visualize, those threads, those wraps are going clockwise, and I'm going to bring that back counterclockwise so that the copper wire is going to crisscross over the other wraps, and you can see how fragile this stuff is. I'm going to make those wraps a little bit, leave a little distance between. Try to make your wraps equally distant from each other. And then I'm going to go forward, and when I get to my 2/3 point, I'm going to try and tie that off, but do not get rid of your copper wire. Do not get rid of it. Okay? At this point, I want to leave my thread back where my copper wire is, but I'm going to continue to make some wraps forward with that copper wire. I'm going to build up a little bit depth with just my copper wire, and that's going to give the fly a little bit more weight. Okay, and when you've got that built up, then you can tie it off again, and at that point you can get rid of it. And I wrap on both sides of that copper wire to make sure I've got it trapped. And then I'm going to trim that off. Okay? Now the next thing we want to tie on is our pearl, whatever it's called. The thing that's critical here is that you tie that on the top. You want it on top so that when you fold it over, it's going to be nice and centered on the top. And tie that in pretty good.
One piece or two?
just one strand. Just one strand of the pearl. Then on this fly, because I'm using a 12, I'm going to use 3 or 4 strands of peacock herl, because I'm going to need a little bit more. So I'm going to kind of pull this out and make sure everything I'm going to tie on has got color to it. And I'm going to lay that on. I'm going to attach that. I'm going to wrap it forward. Make sure I've got it on there tight. And then I'm going to half hitch up behind the eye of my hook. And now I'm ready to start wrapping the peacock herl forward. Now again, if you spread those barbs down a little bit before you start twisting, if you remember, these barbs have a tendency to separate as well. So I'm going to try and put a little bit of twist into those right from the get-go. And I'm going to start wrapping forward, making my thorax out of this peacock herl. And when I got a pretty good little knob there, then I'm going to tie that off. I'm having the same problem. One of those peacock herl strands came apart on me. I'm glad I had a couple extra. I'm going to trim that peacock herl, get it out of there. Okay. And now we're ready to bring forward your pearl. Make sure it's on the top of the hook. And just kind of hold it there. Attach it with an easy wrap. And if it's centered on the top, you're good to go. I'm going to trim that pearl off. And then I'm going to make a small head. I'm going to whip finish it off. And then I'm going to finish it with just a little dab of that UV material. This stuff is pretty thick, so when you put it on, put a thin coat on. I'm going to try and show you what I'm going to try to do here. I've got one of these tools that Matt got this for me some time ago, and I'm going to put just a little bit on the top of this. Make sure I have it all covered, but I don't want to get it down into the peacock herl, because it'll gum it up and the peacock herl won't do what it's supposed to. And hand me that flight, that big one. Yeah. Then you zap it with your UV light, and that really enhances that pearl. And I can turn that around so you can. It really makes it shine. And that is a Flashback pheasant tail.